Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's great to have you here today with us in our Fireside chat series organized by the Financial Center for Sustainability Lagos and the Nigeria Climate Innovation Center, two institutions that have decided to champion the climate change narrative space in Nigeria to try to change narrative and get people's attention focused on very topical and current issues in this space. I have with me today my colleague, Mr. Bankole Olorotoba, the CEO of the Nigerian Climate Innovation Center. Bankole. And my name is Emmanuel Etadiri. I am the Executive Secretary of the Financial Center for Sustainability Lagos. And today our guest is a professor in this space. Is a globally recognized leading scholar on climate governance and international development with expertise in climate justice, national green growth transition in Africa, climate adaptation, business climate strategies, environmental policies. He's advised governments, he's advised corporate institutions and organizations, international development partners and agencies. He's spoken to the United Nations, the African Union. He's done a lot of work in this space. Please, ladies and gentlemen, help me welcome Professor Chukwumerije Okereke to this Fireside chat series. Professor?
Thank you, Emmanuel. Thank you, Bankole. It's a pleasure to be here. I look forward to this interaction. Yeah, it's an honor. Thank you so much for having me.
Excellent. So I'm told I can simply refer to you as Professor Chooks. I guess that's okay with you.
Yeah, that's okay.
Excellent. Yes. So, and I think I'll just get my colleague as usual, Bankole, to kickstart the conversation. So, Bankole, over to you.
Okay. Hello, Prof. It's good to have you here, Professor Chooks. Let's just stick with that name. And again, apologies for our rigmaroling going around the world, before we will come back to you. But I think that, it's a classic example of what they say, that whatever you're looking for in Sokoto is just down there, it's just right here with you in Sokoto. So I would like to thank you for gracing us, for giving us the opportunity to have this conversation with you. And as Emmanuel has said, we have been on a journey for a while now, trying to share as much knowledge around the growth of a green economy in Nigeria. And this is one of the things that we like to do. So I know that you're a founding member, of the IPCC. You're the one representing Africa, in one way or the other. Maybe, I'm sure you can correct me if I'm wrong. But again, to kick off these questions, there are some things that we just want quite a number of people to sort of understand, from a different perspective, not just from a foreign perspective, but, from a scholar and at the same time, a Nigerian-based perspective. And so I will just jump right straight into this question. So we have a couple of questions to have a conversation with you. One of them, again, is trying to find out, from your experience. We know that you have been deeply involved, with global climate change conversations, in the past decades, and you have spent an ample time, in the UK as a scholar, also analyst, researcher, and co. So, from your experience, what are those practical lessons, or rather lessons, that you think Nigeria can learn from both the world and also, the UK government when it comes to climate governance model? Put it into perspective, the COP26 coming ahead, and quite a number of conversations that we've had, in the past.
Well, thank you. That's a very good question. When I think about it, there are a number of different lessons that I think Nigeria can learn from the way that the UK and indeed many other developed countries have sought and continues to seek to address the challenge of climate change. Let me see if I can highlight a few. Number one is emphasis on research. UK was one of the first countries in the world to establish interdisciplinary centers of research, centers of research on climate change. Emmanuel might know about the Tindo Center for Climate Change Research, which was established in 2000 in the UK. The headquarters was in University of East Anglia, but the Tyndall Center had University of Manchester, I think Birmingham University, Cardiff University, and a number of other universities as part of that consortium. And the Tyndall Center did quite a lot of work in providing the scientific basis for the UK government to design and implement its climate policy. So emphasis on research is fundamental. Since then, the UK government has established many other centers of research on climate change, including the Center for Climate Change Economics at London School of Economics, the ESRC Center at Leeds and Cardiff, but also has invested quite heavily in modeling capabilities, especially at the Hadley Center and Oxford. So I'm quite fortunate that I was one of the people that actually, I started my career at the Tyndall Center for Climate Change, which was the one of the most prestigious, if not the most prestigious Center for Climate Change Research then in the UK. And I went on to work at the University of Oxford, also on the issue of climate change and development. So emphasis on research is one of the things that I see that is significantly different from the way that developing countries like Nigeria handle climate change and advanced countries. I do not see a commensurate emphasis on developing research capability in this country as I'm used to in the UK. The second and related is the emphasis on policy research interface. So when we were at the Tyndall Center and subsequently at the Smith Center for Climate Change, for Environment and Development at Oxford, we had regular interactions with policymakers. Those of us in the academia that we are kind of doing the research felt really honored and appreciated by the policymakers who understood that they needed the scientific capabilities and basis and data to guide them in their research. We were, regularly invited to sit at the table where discussions are had about how government would approach climate change. Our policy documents and papers were feeding directly into government. The government, of course, also had the chief scientific officer, and those are responsible for advising them on climate change, with whom we were interacting regularly. I do not see such policy research interface as being strong in this country, and I think it's regrettable. Now, the third one, which again lines up with that, is the science-based approach to climate change and generally environmental decision-making. Professor Andy Jordan at the University of East Anglia and Tyndall Center, who gave you a recommendation to approach me for this chat, is one of the leading names in science-based approach, evidence-based approach to environmental decision-making. And here, I do not see that. I see a lot of kind of rapid response, a lot of knee-jerk, a lot of reactionary approach to environmental and climate change decision-making, which of course, if you do things in a hurry and you don't give yourself time and it is not backed up by significant evidence, you're very likely to get it wrong. And the other one, I think the fourth one I will cite, is political stature and status. In the UK, we have a full Department of Energy and Climate Change, which is a full British government department created in 3rd October 2008 by the then Prime Minister Gordon Brown to take over some of the functions related to energy and the Department for Business, Enterprise and Regulatory Reform, and some functions related to climate change, formerly in the Department for Environment, Food and Rural Affairs. And this was well received by the community, the climate change community, as a clear demonstration that the government wished to place a political emphasis and priority on an understanding the science of climate change and the right approaches to policy design. Of course, I think in 2016, that department has now been rolled into the broader Department for Energy, Climate Change, Business, Energy, and Industrial Strategy. And this now leads me to the last point I want to make. By bringing the issue of climate change into the Department for Business, Energy, and Industrial Strategy, what the UK government was saying is that climate change is not just a mere small environmental issue, but an issue that is linked to business, to innovation, to energy, to industrial strategy. And I think their annual budget is about $1.5 billion. And this gives you an idea, again, of the political status that has been the stature and priority in which the government has placed on climate change. In Nigeria, we have a very dynamic Department for Climate Change, but it's a department, and so you don't have to confuse that when I say Department for Climate Change and Energy in the UK, is a full ministry. But here is a department. They are doing very well, they are trying, but you can understand that the political stature and status and profile will not be the same as if it was a full-blown ministry. And as we perhaps will explore going forward, integrating climate change into other parts of the economy remains a challenge in this country. So those are some of the 5 key differences between the policy approach to climate change in the UK and in Nigeria, which I think already begins to give you a clear understanding of why maybe we may not be getting it right over here. Thank you. I hope that is helpful, but if you want to follow up on that, I'm quite happy to elaborate.
I mean, it was quite helpful. So let me just quickly ask you a second question before Emmanuel takes over also and jumps up with the next with the third question. Well, around this, right? Just piggybacking on what you said, right? In a recent interview, you sort of published, you described the recently published IPCC report, which many people are really scared of. Some say it is overbearing. Some said it's just, some almost wanted to call it a wash, but we don't want to agree with that. But there was something you said that where you described the report as a provocative and damning assessment of where things are, and where you call for immediate action, in order to avert, a future crisis. So can you please just walk us through this, hypothetically code red report and its immediate implications on our economy, putting into perspective the different challenges we have around governance, infrastructure, and even in futuristic thinking. Can you just help us go through this around this provocative report and what it implies to us as a country in Nigeria? Sure, that's great. As you know, I'm a coordinating lead author of the IPCC for the AR6. And to be a coordinating lead author means that you're basically the editor in charge of a chapter, and the chapter I'm involved in is the introductory chapter and the framing chapter. But I was a lead author of the IPCC for the AR5, which is the 5th assessment report, and also a lead author of the special report on 1.5, which is a joint report for the working group 1, 2, and 3, looking at the impact of climate change, the impact of global warming, 1.5 global warming. So for a long time, anyone who has been following the IPCC will know that we have been highlighting the situation that the climate is changing, and that we can attribute a substantial degree or percentage or amount of that change to human-induced, to human activities, which we call anthropogenic activities. Now, what we have now in the AR6, which is the one that has just been released, to which you referred, is that improved knowledge of climatic processes, paleoclimatic evidence, and the response of the climate system to increasing radiative forcing gives now sort of a very great estimate of equilibrium climatic sensitivity.
of about 3 degrees, and with a much narrower range compared to what we have in AR5. So what this means is that we can now say more authoritatively how the climate is going to change, and through the help of modeling, ensembles, and climatic scenarios and backcasting, we can also say unequivocally that human influence is responsible for much of the warming of the atmosphere, the ocean, and the land. And what the report also does is that it provides a graphic evidence of the widespread and rapid changes in the atmosphere, in the ocean, in the cryosphere, in the biosphere that has occurred. On the scale of recent changes across the climatic system as a whole, and the present state of many aspects of the climate change are quite unprecedented. We haven't seen anything like that before. And remember that many of these changes are actually irreversible. So once they've happened, it is not possible, unless you're talking in terms of centuries or thousands of years, to reverse the change. So the evidence of observed changes in extremes such as heat waves, heavy precipitation, drought, tropical cyclones, and in particular the attribution to human influence has strengthened since we published the last report. And what we now know is that global surface temperature will continue to rise or increase until at least the mid-century, under all the IPCC scenarios that are considered. So global warming of about 1.5 and 2 degrees will be exceeded during the 21st century unless we have deep decarbonization or reductions in carbon dioxide, and as well as other greenhouse gas emissions such as methane. So, and also we now have this report telling us that things that we previously considered as low likelihood events, such as the ice sheet collapse or abrupt ocean circulation changes, may actually happen, and that the risk of these things happening are much more. And finally, this report also draws attention to the regional differences in terms of the way that the climate will change and its impact. So what is the significance to Nigeria? This is a very, very valid question. I sit in meetings all the time where people are thinking and talking about climate change as if it's some kind of white man problem. We're talking about, the melting of ice sheets somewhere, and polar bears are disappearing, and all the albedo is changing, and there's nothing that has to do with this country. But nothing can be further from the truth. In my view, climate change represents one of the most important challenges facing Nigeria today. Now, if we have 20 days, I can cover these 20 days with detailed examples. But let me see if I can summarize it this way. The first is that Nigeria is one of the most vulnerable countries to climate change. We have a system or a country which has a combination of what we call the low adaptive capacity, as well as the geographical positioning of the country, makes it very, very vulnerable to climate change. Think, for example, the fact that about 86% of Nigerian and indeed African agriculture is rain-fed. This means that when you have changes in precipitation pattern, rainfall pattern, or the pattern of temperature, it can have huge effect on the productivity, crop productivity in the country. Already, we are not able to feed ourselves as it stands. Now, slap on top of that challenge the issue of climate change, which is bound to reduce the productivity of most of our food crops by up to 20, 30, and some cases 50% in the next 20 or 30 years. Then you begin to understand the kind of effect of climate change on poverty in this country. Take another example, the desertification that is occurring in the north. We are losing vast portions of the northern part of the north to desertification, which in part is caused by climate change. Climate change is not the only reason, but climate change is a major contribution to that desertification. Now, this also means the loss of arable land for food production, and also the movement of farmer headers down to the south, which as you would know, will bound to exacerbate the security challenges that we're having. We know, of course, that climate change has contributed to the massive shrinking of Lake Chad, which has meant the dropping of the ability of the cattle rearers to have the kind of vegetation that is required to cater for their cattle, which is also contributing to the movement down south and to the insecurity and conflict that we are seeing. Think of flooding as well. This country, Nigeria, has been experiencing unprecedented degree of flooding since 2012. I think that I read somewhere a Red Cross statistics that suggests that last year, 30 out of the 36 states were affected by flooding, and that property worth billions were lost, and maybe up to 1,300 lives were lost. Now, this flooding, as well as coastal inundation and sea level rise, will endanger a huge number of people and kilometers in the coastal regions. There are projections that suggest that at a sea level rise of about 0.5 or 0.7, cities such as Lagos could be completely inundated, and up to 550 million people could be displaced in Lagos by 2035 as a result of sea level rise. Now, we have a vast amount of our oil infrastructure that are susceptible to sea level rise, coastal erosion, and inundation. So when you put all these things together, you see that Nigeria is sitting on a keg of gunpowder, which is likely to explode with devastating consequences unless we begin to put in place powerful, strategic, innovative, and concerted political approaches and pressure to get the problem sorted. Now, all of this is about the impact of climate change in terms of the various sectors that I have sketched. But there is another big danger facing the country, which makes it really, really vulnerable to climate change. This is that we are hugely dependent on oil, which accounts for about 90% of our foreign exchange earning. And the world is moving to a greener economy. Many international oil companies already begin to divest from Nigeria. Several countries have already indicated that they will not buy oil or allow fossil fuel powered cars within their jurisdiction from 2040, 2030 onwards. Now, the question becomes, even if we are not as vulnerable to climate change in the ways that we have described in terms of our agriculture, water, coast, etc., we are still vulnerable in terms of the fact that we may not find people to buy our oil, and that is going to lead to a massive recession, if not depression, with cataclysmic proportion of consequences in terms of job loss, in terms of socioeconomic welfare, in terms of income, etc. So sorry for that. Has it been dealt with now? I think so. Anyway, so you see that we are in a bind. If we do nothing in terms of adaptation, we will be severely punished by climate change on several fronts, both in terms of the adaptation, but also in terms of the dependence on oil and the impact that will have in a context where a majority of the world population and countries are making effort to make a transition from oil-dependent economy to the post-oil green economy.
Thank you very much, Professor Chuks. I've followed carefully and with close attention your points and responses to Mr. Bankole's questions. And one of the things that struck me in the beginning was the fact that the UK took a deliberate measure and effort to prepare itself for climate change by establishing structures, and putting money behind their plans too. You quoted a juicy amount of money, 1 point something billion pounds available for, the climate change department to activate its or to implement its activities or objectives. Now, Ron, taking my question is taken off from that point, and I'm looking at Nigeria in particular now. Let's talk about policy innovation. Policy is the fulcrum of climate change and climate action, and that is what will help us to transit to a new green economy. Can you help us understand the dynamics of policy continuum from design to implementation, both on the global perspective and the local Nigerian perspective, given the fact that we seem, well, yes, the president on June 2nd signed the national policy on climate change, but I mean, can you give us some tips on how we can, actually move from just signing policies to ensuring that there is determined and positive implementation?
Thank you very much, Emmanuel. So you are absolutely right that policy is a fulcrum, is the centerpiece if you want to deal intelligently with climate change. Let's start with the global level. You see, at the global level, in the first years, and I have followed this very closely. I did my PhD on climate change governance at the global level, and have participated quite actively in many of the COPs, the Conference of Parties, representing diverse organizations, including the African Union, the British, and many other organizations. You see, at the global level, the first years, the emphasis was majorly on the distribution of responsibilities, something that, by the way, I'm very, very interested in, because climate change is not just a scientific problem, it is also a moral problem. It's a moral problem in the sense that the impact of climate change is not borne proportionally across board. And indeed, that some of those who contributed more to climate change are not the ones that are bearing or exposed to the brunt of the impact of climate change. So, but how to distribute emissions across the cooperating parties, the countries that are part of the treaty, was a major part of the conversation in the first years. And so, if you remember, when we moved from the United Nations Framework Convention of Climate Change to the Kyoto Protocol, the emphasis was actually mostly in terms of the QERO, the Quantified Emission Reduction Obligation. And what happened was that the emphasis was, how do you distribute quantified emission reduction obligation across among states? But the part of the big debate that was hard in 1992, during the Rio agreement, and then which was when you also had the UNFCCC, was that some countries preferred more of a framework convention, a kind of agreement. And the framework or convention is different from a protocol. For those of you who are familiar with international law, the framework convention brings states together and says, we would like to do this. It's quite a good thing if we try and do it. We encourage people, countries, to collaborate and find ways in which they can solve this problem. A protocol is a much more narrow agreement that goes into detail about the policy recommendations and innovations and specifics on how that problem can be solved, sometimes with quantified targets. And so it took quite a long time to move from the convention, the UNFCCC, to the protocol, which was much more specific on policy instruments. But even with the Kyoto Protocol, the emphasis, as I said, remained mostly on quantified emission reduction obligation. Now, not long after, the EU, being very clever, introduced kind of a test emission trading platform to allow the countries that were interested in participating and the companies as well to gain some experience in emission trading. This is one of the reasons why the EU moved ahead of the US and continues to be ahead in some aspects of climate change. It was this kind of policy learning that they embraced through the test emission reduction, the emission trading system. Interestingly, some of the key concepts of emission trading were actually borrowed from the US. But the US then had the politics that didn't allow them to make as much progress as perhaps one would have expected at that time. And so by the time we came to the 1997 in Kyoto and the design, the emphasis was much on how do you use market instruments to reduce emission. Since then, policy has continued to mature, and in some cases quite rapidly. And now we have a wide array of policy instruments with which anyone or any state can begin to grapple and tackle the issue of climate mitigation and emission. And some of these include, for example, renewable energy obligation, which was quite successful at the European Union level. And what it requires is that countries should have a target to generate a certain percentage of their energy from renewable sources. And the country would then put in place some specific policies that will allow that to happen. In some cases, this can require giving some money, some grants, some subventions to the energy generating company. In some cases, it requires some kind of agreement on bulk purchasing. Feed-in tariff also came in as a major way, a major policy instrument for helping to grow, to tackle the problem. The other key policy that became increasingly relevant and used is investment in R&D for renewable energy. You may know that even as I speak to you, there is an existing 20 billion euros set aside by the European Union to support demonstration on low carbon technologies and innovation. And this is, again, as we're speaking with respect to the first question, this is one area where there is a huge gap between what the developed countries are doing and what we are doing. We don't still see climate change as something that requires huge investment in innovation. We are busy swimming at the periphery. And most of our activities actually designed to meet international obligations, like writing policy documents, like NAMA, like third national, the third national communication, and more recently, the NDC. And there's nothing wrong with these sorts of policies or documents, because they're not really policies, they are documents. But if you don't seek clear ways to domesticate these policy papers and come up with clearly innovative policies that would drive mitigation and adaptation at the national level, then you are bound to be going in circles. You won't get much achieved. So in the UK, we have a raft of policies like the home insulation scheme, green schemes for farmers, regulations and bans, traffic regulation, low zero or low carbon zones. There are places where you cannot drive to in London and in Oxford. Changes at the local levels are being made the way that, you know, the tracks are being designed. You know, one of the questions I ask myself, you go to London and you see how congested it is. And yet you still see some tracks for bicycle. You go to the Netherlands, you go to any train station, you see massive number of bikes parked there. I studied in the Netherlands for 1 year. And while I was there in the Netherlands, although I didn't have money, a lot of money, but actually I didn't need to use a car to do anything. I used bicycle for all the time that I was there. The Prime Minister goes to office with his bicycle. Even in the UK, you see Boris Johnson sometimes going to the office when he was mayor, and even now as the Prime Minister with his bicycle. But you go to Abuja and you don't see a clear place, you know, marked for cyclists. Even the pedestrian walkways are not, in most cases, clearly marked. And so we are still lagging behind. And you wonder, these are the people that are actually struggling in terms of money. It is eminently better to use bicycle or to walk than to drive everywhere. And yet we see that in the way we design our cities, we're not giving emphasis to these sorts of things. So we need to really think very hard about how we can domesticate and we can expand, take an innovative approach to policy making in the country, because otherwise we will just be spending our time writing policy papers, but really getting nowhere in terms of addressing the problem, or also actually leveraging the problem and turning it into opportunities. And so I hope that helps to address the question.
Really helpful.
Excellent. I just want to say you've actually answered two questions in one.
Exactly. You know, that was what I was going to say.
Yeah, you answered two questions in one. The point I'd just like to highlight from what you had said earlier on was the fact that in the case of Nigeria, unlike Britain, I don't think we have our own climate change act or law passed yet. It's been passed by the House. It was concluded by the 8th National Assembly, but the president did not assent to the bill to make it an act. So the 9th Assembly under the House have finalized the bill. They're waiting for the Senate to pass it, and then they take it back to the president, because now they have addressed some of the concerns they said he raised. But in the case of the UK, since 2008, they've had the Climate Change Act sealed and passed, and it's working. So that's the only point I want to bring out. And I'll say, Bankole, you can take it up from there, and we can look at the other couple of questions. Yes.
Okay, thank you so much, Prof. Just for us to move forward, I mean, you've elaborated a lot around policy and how functional policies need to be, but can you just bring it down a little bit home and look at the most recent, NDC document that we have, submitted ahead of the COP26. I'm not sure if you were involved in the design process either, but also we just want to hear from you. What is your own assessment of the recent climate change policy that was approved by the federal government? That's if it was being approved, and also the revised NDC document that we submitted, not too long ago, ahead of COP26.
Brilliant. Let me step back and actually let Emmanuel know that he referred to what happened to the climate change bill in the 8th Assembly. But actually, the climate change bill has a much longer history. It was also passed in the 7th Assembly, but was not assented to by President Goodluck Jonathan. And I was heavily involved in the first attempt to craft the climate change bill. This newly revised one, I'm quite happy to say that I also played a prominent role. I was the leader of the technical committee that was inaugurated by the Speaker of the House, Right Honorable Bajamiala, to revise to help to revise the bill. And one of the key things that we've tried to do in the new bill is to make a delineation between the role of whatever body that may be sent, call it an agency, call it a directorate or whatever, and make sure that there is a clear delineation of responsibility between such a body and the Ministry of Environment, in such a way that they can work synergistically rather than in competition. And we've actually, if you like, circumscribed the functions of such a directorate to mostly be around trying to hold the government to account, as opposed to being an implementer or an implementer. And this means that the Ministry of Environment and the Department of Climate Change will continue to be the main body that is implementing, but that these new directorates, as it were, could actually help to elevate the status of climate change and help through the Ministry of Environment to achieve a greater mainstreaming with the other sectors of the economy, which is required to provide the political gravitas and leverage that is needed to deal with the issue of climate change. Now, what many people still don't understand is that climate change is not just an environmental problem that you can deal with by the office, by one small ministry, not small, by one ministry. What you need is interministerial collaboration at the highest level, at the very highest level. Because if you're dealing with transportation as a means of curbing climate emission, then you are in the realm of electric vehicles, you're in the realm of rails, you're in the realm of gas to power. This is something that you cannot do effectively without collaborating deeply with the Ministry of Transportation. Okay. If you're trying to solve climate change by generating more of your energy from renewable sources, this is not something you can do without collaborating intensely with the Ministry of Power. If your approach to climate change is greater agricultural resilience, newly improved seed varieties, climate agriculture, promotion of agroecology, rainwater harvesting, etc., then you need the active collaboration of the Ministry of Agriculture. This is why, finally, of course, if you're interested in legislating and implementing emission reduction in the business sector, then you will have to deal with the Ministry of Commerce and Industry. And if you're looking for the finance, that is, the large-scale finance to deal with this problem, then you have to work with the banks, and you might need to deal with the Ministry of Finance and Economic Planning, as well as the CBN. So I don't still think that we have a good understanding here about the scale of the problem and the sort of institutional innovation or device that is required to tackle the problem. But what we have is, and these are my friends in the Ministry of Environment, and they work really hard. They are extremely dynamic. If you look at their size, you kind of begin to understand that they're actually, turning water into wine. They're making things happen with almost nothing. But it's still not enough, to move the wheel, to turn the wheel with the speed and direction that is required to address the deep-seated challenge. And this takes me to the question, of course, that you're asking about the NDC. If you look at the NDC, you will see that it's a very robust document to a very large extent. We have made another commitment now, retained our commitment for, I think, 20% emission reduction unconditionally, increased from 45 to 47 conditional. But what worries me really is the implementation. You know that the Center for Climate Change and Development at Alex Ekwueme Federal University, as well as the Society for Planet and Prosperity, both of which I am heavily involved and play a leadership role. I've done quite a lot of work providing independent analysis that could help to guide the government in the revision of the NDC. One of the work that we did was actually an analysis of the extent to which the previous NDC had been implemented. And quite frankly, that paper shows that it is very hard to be very optimistic about the extent of implementation that we had in the previous NDC. The question then becomes, what is the most important rationale for pushing for a revised NDC when the old one had not been implemented to a very large degree? It was promised that we will end oil flaring. Maybe some good effort is being made, but that has not worked out. It was promised in the old NDC that we will generate about 30 gigawatts of our energy from renewable sources. We are not on course to achieving that. It was promised that we will make a rapid DRT transition in the industry, in the transportation sector. That has not happened. So what is the guarantee that the newly revised NDC, good as it may seem on paper, will actually be implemented? And so my worry is that we still lack a framework for the implementation and for the assessment of the extent to which we have. I know there are still challenges in terms of the rigor of the data that is used, but I think there is some significant improvement in that respect. And so what worries me is the money. I think there was an analysis that showed that I think in the old NDC that we need around $142 billion to implement it. I think this new NDC has some figures which runs into several hundreds of billions as well. But if you now go to the budget to say, where is this money going to come from? Where is it voted for? You can't trace. It's difficult to trace the climate change budget or dimensions or aspects in the Nigerian budget. So there is still a lack of integration between the documents that we are providing and the policies and the politics that we are playing. I am hoping that the climate change bill may begin to help to address this, but that will not suffice unless we put our house in order, bring the right caliber of people to work with the government, to learn lessons from the UK and other sources, and to seek ways of mainstreaming climate change into other sectors.
Thank you very much, Professor Chuks. In the course of your response, you have covered a number of questions we had in mind. So we're just going to, in the interest of time, jump to the next line of questioning. And we're looking at what you had done in terms of your papers you published in the past and the lectures you've given around low carbon development in Nigeria. Is it possible to just highlight a clear path to how we can transition to a low economy and a green, low carbon economy in Nigeria? What are your thoughts on this light?
Well, as I have been saying before, but actually it's not rocket science. The first thing is that you need to give political prominence to the issue, okay? You have to give political prominence to the issue. Then you need a science-driven approach, okay? You need a science-driven approach. You need to make sure that what you're doing is driven by science. And so we need to fund centers of excellence that will help to come up with concrete recommendations on what's required to be done. And then we need to focus on mainstreaming, as I've been saying. We need to mainstream climate change into the other sectors of the economy. I have given detailed examples, drawing from transportation, from energy, from agriculture. And then we need also to pay emphasis on the money. You know, one of our friends, Hamzi, has his organization called Follow the Money. You need to pay emphasis on where the money is going to come from. In terms of the design, the government will need to look at 4 or 5 key areas. Number one is infrastructure. When you're conceptualizing a path to a low carbon economy, you need to pay attention on your infrastructure. We have a country where about 70% of its infrastructure is yet to be built. We're talking about rail infrastructure, power infrastructure, we're talking about transportation infrastructure, etc., etc. And so we must make sure that in the construction of this infrastructure, we are taking a low carbon route. The next thing is institutions. And you have to make sure that you have the right type of institution that will help you to elevate the problem of the issue of low carbon economy. We have many examples. You've talked about the Climate Change Act in the UK, in Rwanda. I actually led in 2009 a group of people, academics from Oxford University and other universities around the world, to develop the first green growth strategy for Rwanda. And in that, part of our recommendation for the effective governance of climate change was the establishment of a climate change and innovation interministerial committee that was jointly chaired by the Minister of Finance and the Environment. In India and other parts of the country, we have the right, some kind of attempt to set up the right institution. You know, of course, that in America, we have the climate change envoy in the name of Ambassador John Kerry. So we need some kind of institutional device to show that we are serious. And then we need to think about investment. Emmanuel, you are in the green finance space. The green bond, the 2 green bonds that we have in Nigeria are very good examples of how you can innovate in terms of finance that is required to address the problem. And finally, very importantly, you need to make sure that you're emphasizing those policy devices and measures that will help you to tackle climate change while also growing your economy and improving the livelihood and welfare of people. And the clearest example is in agriculture and in energy. You find out that we still have a huge percentage of the population that are using traditional devices to cook, which is causing air pollution and death of more of our women. And yet we have abundance of sunlight that can be harnessed and harvested for this kind of purpose. So by looking for low carbon green alternatives to cooking, you are simultaneously rather addressing the problem of energy as well as climate change. And this is one of the clearest examples of how you can build and grow your economy while also tackling climate change.
Thank you very much, Professor. I'd like my colleague, Bankole, to wrap up with a couple of last questions. And Bankole, the floor is open.
All right, thank you so much, Prof. So just quickly help us round this up, right? We know that governance has got its role, right? And so as much is the attitude towards climate. So can you just help us? How can we band together governance and climate literacy for us to be able to see that proper transition happen within the emerging climate economy in Nigeria?
So one of the reasons why countries such as UK are making progress is the wide and deep level of climate literacy. You know that UK declared a climate emergency, I think 2016 or so. And that was almost forced on it by the wide demonstrations that was orchestrated by, in most cases, the youth, asking that the UK scales up its effort in dealing with the issue of climate change, including by declaring a climate emergency. And so you also know that in Sweden and other parts of the country, Greta Thunberg and co have really helped to popularize and deepen the understanding of climate change and the need for some kind of rapid action. And you cannot separate the effort made by the governments in these countries from the pressure, the awareness that is coming from the broader public. There is a strong correlation between public understanding and awareness of climate change and the governance measures put in place. I remember many, many years ago when I was talking to a UK politician, and she was telling me that they live to serve the public, and then they follow the public in terms of what the public wants them to do, and that if they went faster than public opinion, they'll be voted out of office. And so it is very, very vital that we spend a lot of time actually improving or seeking to improve climate awareness. And this is where one of the reasons I came back to this country, that I thought I could establish a Center for Climate Change and Development that will help to improve public awareness, but also provide concrete policy recommendations from my vast experience that can help to guide this country on the path of green growth and low carbon economy. I don't think I have achieved that, but it's a step in, we're making steps. At the Center for Climate Change and Development at Chukwumerije University, we've put up several webinars, several competitions. We've recently run a climate change and art competition, which my friends and colleagues like Chinedum Wasum, Gozie Dum, all helped me with, Boyega, Olurefemi, and many others. And what we're trying to do is to popularize. We also have organized an essay competition on climate change and giving awards to the winners of that competition. So I understand the importance of public awareness, and I'm happy and still trying to invest as much as I can to grow the awareness of climate change among the Nigerian populace. But the example or the advice you gave me when we started, which is to try and also make my voice a bit more heard from the national papers, is something that I also seek to take seriously. But here also there is a room for collaboration between my center and, for example, the Bankolis Innovation Center and your center as well, so that we can see how we can work together to continue to elevate public awareness on climate change in Nigeria. Thank you. Thank
you very much, Bankole. All right, thank you very much, everyone. It's been 1 hour of deep, incisive, analytical conversations around the key issues on climate change governance in Nigeria, and also from a global perspective. We've been having a fireside chat with our eminent professor of climate governance and climate policies, who has worked with the highest body of scientists in the world, the IPCC, in terms of climate change, and who's also advised major governments and institutions in the world, and who has agreed that he's going to make his voice, to be more prominently heard in his home country. I'm happy he's been a part of the attempt by the 9th Assembly to pass a legislation on this issue. I'm so glad to hear about that. And I'll be following closely the actions of the National Assembly in getting this particular legislation passed and assented to by the president within the tenure of this particular government, within this regime. It's important we get things done quickly as well, prepare for COP21, COP26. So thank you very much. And just for the audience, please note that this session will be recorded and also published via various social media. And we hope to get more people to join us in subsequent sessions. And we hope to also collaborate with Professor in future engagements. Bankole?
Said it all well, Emmanuel. Thank you so much, everyone. And we look forward to another wonderful guest in the coming month. We want to thank Prof for his time, for this elaborate analysis. And for anyone who's got further more questions, you can please check us up on our individual social media platforms, or you send an email, and we will get as much insight for you from the Prof, as the case may be. Thank you so much for participating for your 1 hour time. And Prof, Again, thank you.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure. Take care.
Thank you,
Take
Bankole.
care.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right.